Right, welcome to this week's edition of the Old Paratrooper podcast, and I'm joined today with former SAS soldier and founder of the Modern Warrior Project, Mr. Lindsay Bruce. How you doing, pal? All right?
Very well. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
No dramas at all, mate. Thank you very much for taking the time. I know you're kind of a busy boy, so I'm just glad you've kind of made time to come on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I always take the opportunity to do podcasts, mate, because like I said before we start recording today, it's just that one thing that may be of interest, may help somebody. I love getting my message out, and I love talking for Scotland. So,
no, fair play to you, pal. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. What I like to do with all the podcasts is I like to get a bit of a background about the individual, about the guest, kind of where they grew up, how their childhood was, and like ultimately what led them down the path that they did, and obviously your case, the military, and so on and so on. So yeah, over to you, pal. Where did you grow up?
So I was born in Edinburgh. My dad was still in the army, so I can't remember my dad's days in the army because I was just a baby, you know. So I think he left the military when I was about 1. So I was born in Edinburgh, and then we moved to Fort William, and I spent my whole childhood in Fort William. And typical sort of ex-infantry, ex-special forces background. Grew up in a council estate. Didn't do very well at school at all. Dropped out of school. I always struggled with school. It was a major part of my story, actually, is that I did struggle all through my primary and secondary school. Left school when I was 15. Always very ambitious, very driven. So I had a mindset that I wanted to do something, but I just didn't quite know what that was yet. The army had quite a strong pull on me because of my family history. My dad had been in the military. His 2 brothers joined. My 2 older brothers joined the army, the infantry, same battalion as my dad was in. So we had this very strong family heritage of the Royal Highland Fusiliers, which was the battalion that I was in before I did selection. And lo and behold, at 17 years old, after kicking about for a couple of years, job to job, post school, then I did the inevitable, joined the army, but it wasn't quite straightforward. There was a couple of twists and turns before that, which I could go into, but I've talked about in previous podcasts, actually. And it does link the whole struggling at school thing up with what that trajectory looked like before I joined the infantry. So when I was about 15, like I said, I pretty much dropped out of school. I hated school. I hated it because I wasn't very good at anything apart from art and technical drawing, woodwork, metalwork, all the practical stuff, and anything that required a bit of creativity, I was really good at. But that wasn't enough to see me through to make the whole experience. That was it was a minuscule part of the school experience. So it just wasn't enough to be an overarching factor. So I just wasn't interested in school. I couldn't focus for 5 minutes. Quite bad ADHD from a very young age. And that was really the theme of my whole school life, which was can't concentrate, distracts others, absent a lot. I used to piss off to the snooker club and play snooker because I was a really keen snooker player from the age of about 8, 9 years old. So that was my passion. All I wanted to do when I was a kid was be a professional snooker player. That never worked out. But when I initially left school, the way the story went was that I actually wanted to join the junior leaders, and I think back then it was like 15 years and 8 months you could join the army. But unbeknown to me, they had pulled the plug on that around that time. That restarted again, but around that time for me, at 15 years and 8 months or whatever it was, I called the careers office and said, look, I want to join the army. This is there is no junior leaders anymore. You can't join until you're 17. So I then had like a year and a half to sort of decide what I wanted to do in my life between those 2 points in time. But then I found out you can. This is the embarrassing bit, and you're gonna hate me for this, right? I actually thought to myself, right, what else can I do? It was one of those situations where I thought, well, if I can't do that now, like the typical sort of ADHD part of my brain was like, I wanted to get it done now. I didn't want to wait. So then I heard that you could actually join the Marines at 16, right?
Yeah.
I had quite a strong heritage back in Fort William. There was quite a lot of guys in Fort William who joined the Marines. It had quite a good history up there. And so I applied to join the Marines, and this is quite a funny story. So being completely fucking naive to the whole situation, didn't know what to expect. There was no careers office in Fort William. There was the job centre. That's where the interviews would take place for the Royal Marines. For the Army, you could go to Inverness. That was like an hour and a half away. So for the Marines, they used to do the initial interviews at the job centre in Fort William High Street. So in my mind, I talked to a few guys who had mates who had joined and stuff. And in my mind, I was going this first day to do like a fitness test. No, I still got no idea why I thought that, right? But I remember getting up this morning going, right, I'm going to get my interview for the Marines. So I'd been in the gym practicing my pull-ups and all that sort of stuff, right? And I wore a tracksuit. Stopped off at the local shop, got an energy drink, like a Lucozade or some shit, right? Thinking it was going to give me the advantage, right? And I turned up at the careers office in a tracksuit, and the old boy that was doing the interview says, "What are you doing?" And I says, "Well, yeah, I'm here for my test for the Marines." And he says, "Why are you dressed in a tracksuit?" I says, "Because for my pull-ups and stuff." And he just laughed in my face. He says, "My God," he goes, "I've seen it all now." He says, "No," he says, "This is just an entrance exam. This is just a written test." It would kind of be the story of the day, right? Because I went and did the entrance exam and I failed the fucking entrance exam, like because there was like maths and shit on there that I just didn't know how to do it.
Yeah,
I just didn't know basic math. And the formulas that were part of basic maths, I didn't really concentrate in school at all. So I just didn't know what I didn't know. So when he says, "Look, you've failed the test by 1 point," unknown to me at the time, it was obviously the best thing that could have happened because I am where I am now because of that happening as part of the story.
absolutely.
Can you imagine like the way I felt when I left that careers office, like really fucking disheartened because all this past time from school. I know I'm kind of drawing this introduction out a bit, but I'm in it now. But all that time from school, all those bad memories, all that self doubt, everything like being taught by teachers that I was never going to amount to anything. It was like they were right moment. A moment of they kind of must have been right because this is why I should have concentrated in school, and now I'm paying the piper basically. So next thing I know that I'm sat in the boozer at 16 years old with a pint, sat in my tracksuit, sat in my Adidas tracksuit, drowning my sorrows. And I had to wait a year then before I could join the army, right? So, or go back. I had to wait a year before I could either go back because it was a 12-month gap, or by that time I could join the army anyway. So it turned out that my brothers came home and leave around the time I was able to join, and it says, "Right, we're going to take you up to the Army Careers Office and you're going to join the Royal Highland Fusiliers," and that was it. Between that time, I bummed around I worked as an apprentice welder for a while, quite like that. But then ultimately, my path was to join the army. So joined the army at 17, did basic Glencore's barracks, and absolutely fell in love with the process of the army. I instantly fell in love with the army. I just felt like I had found something that I could be good at. There were elements that still haunted me from school, like written tests and stuff was always a bit like sweaty palms, anxiety, because it kind of brings that feeling back about pen to paper and the relationship I had with that until that point, and for a long time after that was riddled with self doubts. Apart from that, most of the army training and stuff is practical, as you know. So I found out I was physically very fit, so I excelled in fitness. I excelled in things like marksmanship. I was just a good soldier, I guess, and I took to it like a duck to water. A few years later, after doing a few career courses and stuff like that, I was a section commander in a rifle battalion, in a rifle company, should I say, and then did selection at 22. So that was with the Special Forces. Career started, and then did several years in the Special Forces, all over the place. Very busy period. Left, and after like 6 years of service in the regiment, I left. Did a couple of years in security, and that was quite diverse. That was from A-list, like close protection, to security consultancy in hostile environments. Worked for CNN News out in Iraq for quite some time. Was teaching for a bit, and then I fulfilled my passion of what I wanted my next phase of my life to be, which was to go into the fitness industry. So I opened my first gym in 2007, and I was in the gym business for like 15 years. So I had 2 gyms over that time, and at the same time, trained as a coach. And my coaching career has sort of, had many guises as well. So I started off personal training. I started off personal training for free back in the day, and then eventually sort of built myself up, got a reputation, had some good results with some clients. At the same time, parallel to this, I had a competitive bodybuilding career. So I got into bodybuilding quite early on in my regimental career, actually. So I was one of the 6 a.m. weirdos that lifted weights on camp, and everyone else was still in bed. So, I was quite disciplined in that sense, got into bodybuilding, and then that followed me through my coaching career. And over the course of the period of, now what I've been coaching for like 17, 18 years, I've gone from doing things like training bodybuilders and athletes and, helping people lose weight, to now what I do is really along the lines of mostly mindset. So I'm more of a mindset coach, although I do give all the tools and still have that former part of my coaching career in with my coaching model and what I do with the guys. Because at the end of the day, it's like bread and butter. The physical aspect and the mental aspect go together.
Yeah,
so
100%.
So the Modern Warrior Project is what I do now, which was the coaching program for men over 40. And I have got something else actually that's on the horizon that's going to widen the market a little bit and include women as well. But I won't go into that in too much detail. But the Modern Warrior Project was started in lockdown when I decided that I had to pivot my skills and my focus because I didn't know if the gyms were going to open back up again. So when I then went to the online world of coaching and I was working with a demographic that I really resonated with and vice versa, I really fell in love with that whole thing. And I actually felt at that point that I had finally kind of found my purpose, if you like. It's something that a lot of people struggle with and question a lot whether they're on the right path or not. And so part of what I do is to help people understand what they're doing. But for me, that was like the first time I really thought, this is kind of like what I can see myself doing, like for the long term. I feel like this is what I'm supposed to do, is coach people, help people to be better human beings, better men. And that's what takes me to this point in my life, really.
Yeah, no, fair play to you.
On a personal side, I have, I've got 2 kids as well. I've got a 19-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old son, which is my main focus in life.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's good that you've had because there's nothing wrong with spending loads of time in the military. I know, guys, I'm sure you would have done 22 years or done the 25, 30 years or whatever. But I kind of personally never wanted to be. I wanted to have different experiences, and it sounded like you kind of, along the way. But what I want to go back to is the ADHD, because that's something that's really resonates with me. Because I kind of found out, I knew, but I found out maybe 6 years ago that I had ADHD. I kind of knew it, but I took the kind of plunge and did more research and everything else. And yeah, it kind of seems to be quite common with military folk. It's almost like the adrenaline is part of what draws you in because you seek challenges. You kind of keep your brain active, but the script is always the same. It's struggled at school, easily distracted, distract others, all the stuff you said there. Literally kind of runs hand in hand with a lot, not all, but a big percentage of people in the military and even the fire service now and other industries like that. So yeah, how did you kind of, I suppose, sort of any advice you give to anyone really that's struggling with the ADHD? Because I kind of mistook the symptoms of ADHD for kind of a period of time for depression when it was really not understanding my own brain. So how did you kind of deal with it and sort of almost come to terms with it? Because I almost sometimes see it as a bit of a superpower, I jokingly say, because it drives you when you get hyper-focused.
Right. So from an overarching perspective, what I suggest to everybody is that as human beings, all we want is inner peace of mind. It is the overarching factor that covers everything. If you can find inner peace of mind, under that umbrella is everything that you will find that makes you have a good experience in life. Happiness, fulfillment, joy, all the things that we want to experience, but being completely okay with the fact that that's just not reality to have just those things. So I guess when it comes to things like challenge, fear, pain, failure, all these things that are essentially negative emotions or experiences, they're a fact of life. And when you can grasp that fact, that they are a fact of life and not necessarily something that has to become a barrier to your own success, They're there for a reason. It is just simply the yin yang of life. Get used to it, right? And it's like when you accept that, it's like anything. When you accept yourself, when you accept someone else for how they are, when you accept the situation, you find inner peace quicker, because otherwise there's just resistance involved and you're fighting the whole thing. Now, yeah, fighting we have to do at times in life. That's part of the process as well. Some things we have to let go at certain times. Some things we have to fight for. Again, it's the equilibrium. It's the yin and the yang, and everything needs that. Everything throughout the universe is balanced, right? So when it comes to, but here's the thing: you only understand this, and everyone's different. People learn at different rates, different chapters of life. I speak to people who are in their 20s who are way ahead of where I was when I was in my 20s. When I was in my 20s, I didn't know I might have been in the SAS, but I didn't know my arse from a hole in the wall. My ego was that big. I was just running on, ego experiences, which is what most people do. It's not until you get a bit of life experience, a bit of wisdom, you become a bit more long in the tooth, that you then start to work this shit out. Now, on the subject of things like ADHD, depression, anxiety, all these things, they all come from a neurodivergent area, right? So neurodivergent conditions are very intertwined. So you'll find that some people have traits of ADHD, maybe a bit of ASD, OCD, and these things are all very closely related. And this is part of the picture of people not really understanding this. Either people who have one or more of these things, or people who don't tend to have any symptoms. And there are people out there who are almost exempt of these things, who are very fortunate. You'll find that those are the people who are very ignorant to those things as well. There's a lot of ignorance out there. So again, this is two sides of the same coin. There's a lot of ignorance towards mental health, ADHD, ASD, OCD, all the neurodivergent conditions. You get people who scoff at that and go, I've actually watched podcasts where people go, stop bitching about your fucking made up ADHD, and it's like, it's so fucking ignorant, right?
Yeah.
It's so ignorant, because they clearly have never experienced these conditions themselves, and they don't understand them. They're so fucking ignorant. They've not even looked into the science behind these things. Now, the other side of that same coin are the bandwagon jumpers. People who go, oh yeah, my fucking anxiety, no, you're just having a fucking bad day. Sometimes it is a case of dry your fucking eyes, get on with it, right? So then you get that side of things. And here's the pattern that I tend to see, and you probably experienced this many times, or had this thought many times, is that those who suffer from depression, real depression, never fucking talk about it. And you would think a lot of the time that those people are happy, because they often try and help others, or show up and be happy to at least be present in front of others, showing that they are happy, right? But really, secretly, they're fucking depressed. But then you get people who just have a bad day and go, oh, it's because of my anxiety or because of my depression. And they're just looking for an excuse, because they are just not getting their shit together. They're not leaning in. They're avoiding the work that they should be doing, right? They're constantly playing the role of the victim for whatever reason. Now, with that same thing, you have an element of people who are anxious and feeling negative about themselves because of their life and the fact that they can't get up and do shit. Then that might be because of something like ADHD, which again, there's a genuinity woven through that. And you get a mixture of all these things. Everything's in balance. It's not like someone's got ADHD, someone hasn't. It's like a spectrum with multiple things on it that people have, different peaks of certain things. As far as how I manage this, so my personal experience with this is that the whole ADHD thing comes from some level of trauma, and that's experienced at different levels, and it's different for everybody. And it can also be something that's genetically inherited, right? And I've done a lot of reading, a lot of research around this, and I've spoken to a lot of people who are very knowledgeable in this area as well. When you mention something like ancestral trauma, people tend to, again, the ignorant camp will listen to that and go, what a load of bollocks. But it's been proven, right? Because Your DNA is your DNA. Whatever happens with your mum and dad, their mum and dad, so on and so forth, shit can get passed down to you through DNA. It's why we end up being the way we are. And so if someone else suffers trauma in their life, has a really hard upbringing, for example, then you could get some of that very easily. It's quite normal for that. So you then have to sort of step in and start healing that process to let it stop with you. Now, for me, my experience of, and I didn't even really admit this to myself or ever say it until quite recent years. And I found that the more I talked about it, the easier it became, and I managed to sort of let it go. It was that when I was 15, I had a sudden experience whereby I triggered a form of OCD. Because I had a bit of OCD anyway, you know, like the typical OCD of straight lines and cracks in the pavement and counting and not having to have things in certain numbers, certain order, not be able to do something in my left hand before I do it in my right hand and stuff like that. So there were these things that I remember from as far back as I can remember. I remember being very particular about what I was doing. Like whether it be picking something up with my right hand and my left hand and putting it back down with my right hand. These little idiosyncratic behaviours were just something I did, and I didn't really think about it until later on. Hindsight is 2020, right? It makes sense when you look back on it, when you know more. But I had these traits, and when I was a kid, I was a very shy kid. I was quite nervous, probably because I lacked confidence, because I wasn't very good at certain things. I think it's been suggested to me, I've never been diagnosed with this, but it's been heavily suggested that there's quite a lot of dyslexia with me as well, because I couldn't read very well. Still can't read very well. I can read well to myself, but if I was to stand up right now and recite a page from a book, I would stall. I wouldn't be able to fluidly read. There might be little periods of it where I could read a sentence, but then I couldn't keep doing that, right? So it's always been a difficulty for me, which I'm fine with that now. So all these things at a very young age built up to forming lack of confidence, lack of self-belief, because I didn't have the history to do that. And also, as the youngest of four, with three older siblings, let's face it, I was the fucking kid in the corner a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So then, when it came to my teenage years and shit is changing, your hormones are figuring themselves out and whatnot, I suddenly had this moment one day at my mum and dad's house, and I had this trigger that was like, all I can explain. This is probably why I understand mental health conditions so well, because I've gone through it myself to quite an extreme level. Is that if you can imagine that you get complete character or complete personality dissociation, right? So if you suddenly felt like you weren't yourself anymore, right? So you have this almost like an out of body experience. This is what it felt like. And I can compare it only to that of, when someone tells you something that causes you to panic. It can be anything. It can be a letter that you get through the door that you see something that you fucking get instantly anxious about. It can be something that tells you, a doctor tells you something about your health. Someone tells you about something that makes you feel panicky. It was like that, as well as feeling like I'd been pulled away from my own character, like suddenly, and it felt really fucking strange, and it caused me to go into a sense of panic that I've never experienced before. And I didn't say anything because I didn't know how to describe it, so I just stayed silent. And my mum could tell that something was wrong with me, and she was like, "Are you okay?" And I was far from okay, but I just pretended I was okay. I didn't want to worry her, didn't want to fucking sound weird. And it was like intrusive thoughts, really intrusive thoughts about shit. And that exacerbated over a couple of years, and it had peaks and troughs along the way. But I found that my mind was not my own for like 2 years of my life almost. Like I got on with life, and I still managed to have fun and stuff, but there was this constant unwanted guest in my mind until I joined the army. When I joined the army, I got control. It seemed to the unwanted guest disappeared. And one of the things that helped me focus through that time was actually going to the gym. It's one of the reasons I got into the gym and started lifting weights, because it gave me a real focus. It gave me an identity that I really liked at the time. And that was all part of the whole identity thing. Who am I? What am I doing? What's my place in the planet? and that gave me a strong identity to something I wanted to be. So this came and went over the years, this OCD. I didn't even know it was that at the time. I just thought I was the only person on the planet that was feeling this. And I didn't know what to make of it. It is the truth. It wasn't until years and years later, the first person I ever told was my ex-wife when I was about 30 at the time. So that's like 15 years of keeping something in my own fucking mind. It was a long time. And not knowing how to explain it. And even then, when I said something, I still didn't know about it. It wasn't until probably about 5 years ago I started to realise that this is what I had. And I realised when I started to go online and read about it and go on YouTube and find out and speak to people, therapists and whatnot, it's actually quite common. But I had it pretty bad. So that was I guess that was a result of all these things that were, I guess it was just being in your fucking head so much. When you spend so much time in your head, there's so much going on, you can get unwanted guests and it can feel horrendous. But I dealt with it. I dealt with it a lot through physically doing stuff and having a focus that was so big and sometimes so difficult and so audacious that it was an overriding factor. So doing things like SAS selection, and I think it was all in the pursuit of creating a strong identity, because I lacked that as a kid. I lacked the confidence, and I really couldn't combat that. So that was kind of my.
Yeah, it's like you say, you kind of you set yourself almost to kind not distract you. I don't know if that's for the better word, but you kind of you constantly. I find mine's different to yours in a few ways, but I always have to have something to focus on. There's always got to be a challenge. There's always got to be something that you've got to. Otherwise, you're kind of, if you're not focused on anything, you're not pushing forward, whether that be through challenges in fitness, and I've done quite a few over the years, like whether that be kind of sprint triathlons, whether that be kind of diet plans, training for half marathons, whatever it may be, it's a focus. Boxing, I boxed quite a bit because because of the intensity of the training, took my thoughts off of like being. And the kind of a big realization for me was when I was working on the ships, and one of the last transits I did in the Indian Ocean, I was I was the only English speaker on the ship. And obviously, as I'm sure you're more than aware, being on vessels with nothing to do, I had a lot of time in my own brain, and I really didn't like it. So yeah, I kind of really do get where you're coming from, how you have to kind of set yourself constant challenges. But it's not until you get older till you kind of understand this. It's difficult when your mind's developing to kind of figure out what's causing these things. Why am I feeling? You feel a bit like you're abnormal because you're feeling like this, when in fact there are probably lots of other people that experience the same sort of things, but they don't speak about it until they're older, do they?
No, because it's naivety to a lot. It's fear. It really comes back to fear. Fear of being judged, fear of sounding weird, looking stupid, whatever you want to shape it as. But it really comes down to fear. So maturity does help these things. You tend to understand yourself more when you get older. But I think you only understand yourself optimally when you lean in and do the work in yourself, and that takes desire to do so. And this is part of the process that I go through with my guys, is that congratulate them when they first come on board, because they say, look, you've taken a step that is admitting that you need to work on yourself, and that's a strong thing, because we should all be working on ourselves all the time. It should never stop. It's about evolving as a human being. It's about evolving on your path, on your soul path, if you want to believe that. It's like developing your character, learning lessons, which will always be there. Keep on getting the same result. It's like the hand in the hot stove. You wouldn't do it twice if it fucking burned you the first time. But theoretically, people do it in life all the time. The signposts are there to say, by the way, you shouldn't be. You're on the wrong fucking path, right? You shouldn't be doing it, but then they keep doing it, keep making the same mistakes, until they learn the lesson. Something often bad has to happen, or something has to get so out of hand that it forces decision, forces action. But you're right, and what you said a minute ago, spending time on the ships and stuff and having time in your head, that reminds me of when this OCD came back for the second wave, if you like, when I was 20. I was in Northern Ireland, sanger duties, hours upon hours, going sanger to sanger, and also on top cover, you'll get in the streets, you're more alert then, but I remember this fucking one day, this one occasion where this second wave hit me, and it was very sudden. It was like within seconds, it was back. The unwanted guest had fucking burst the door open and come back in again and made himself at home. and I was out on patrol, on a mobile patrol. It was pissing down with rain, and I always remember the song that was on. There's a fucking song by Texas from the album White on Blonde. It was always one of the lads and me used to always play it in the wagon, under the wagon, like when we're doing top cover. And that fucking song became like an anchor to me. However, that song became an anchor that I ended up having to sort of face, because it was like an anchor that when I'd hear the song, I would almost feel like I was being anchored back into that negative position.
Like a bit of a trigger, like almost.
Years later, I had to face it like fucking, like almost like beheading the dragon. When you know, it's like Alice killing the fucking Jabberwocky in Alice in Wonderland. That was my Jabberwocky, you know, it was like an anchor that would pull me, but I had to end up just listening to it and getting through it. And so it wasn't an anchor anymore. So I made it not an anchor and something that I associated with something I actually fucking liked, because I liked the song. But it's weird how the mind works. It's a really fucking fascinating sequence of events, really. But I've learned a lot from that, and I think now that I had to go through that to understand it, so I can then help others. Because you have to walk the path first before you can really speak from a place of experience, whatever that may be.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. And I think research is definitely the key. The more research I do into kind of ADHD, into kind of all sorts of, it helps me understand myself. And I've said this quite a lot. And it was my fiance, bless her, that pointed it out to me, that made me do the more of the research. And like you say, once you understand it, it's the thing. But what I wanted to touch on there, and you loosely touched on it, was like there's mental health, and everyone should attempt to keep on. It's like your kind of physical fitness, trying to keep on top of good mental health, but then there's mental illness as well. And I think sometimes they get massively virgin. Like you said, there's a lot of naysayers out there that can't differentiate between the two. So when you talk about positive mental health, which is how you kind of literally keep yourself positive and not spiraling out of control, it's like going to the gym, keeping in shape so you don't get fat. And I think a lot of people don't understand the difference. They just go, well, I'm trying to keep on top of mental health, positive mental health. And they're like, see that as like some sort of massive mental illness. Do you know what, does that make sense?
Yeah. And this is the thing where the confusion is, because I'll say something now that I feel quite strongly about, and there's a reason why I'm going to say it. And it's a bit of an elephant in the room for me a lot of the time. So you've got two avenues here when it comes to, let's just talk about the fact of people's mental health, or whether they have healthy mental health or whether they're struggling with their mental health. So therefore that's over the cusp of having an element of mental illness. Because if you got a cold, you're ill, right? You might not be terminally ill, but you're still ill for a few days, whatever it is. So you're still not in your homeostatic optimal self. So if you're experiencing a level of mental health which is not positive emotions, but more on the fucking bad side of things, and it's prolonged, or it's something that's shown up more than not. Whatever the case is, right? You've got two types of theme out there. Now, if you look at what I do, for example, and many others do, which is helping men over 40 to become better human beings. That just means that wherever you are, it's being better than you are now, and then constantly progressing on that. So they need to meet themselves where they are now, whatever stage that is, and I need to meet them where they are now. And then we help them from that point, whether it be zero fitness experience whatsoever, and they've never been stepped in a gym in their life, to being, someone who wants to enter a professional event. But wherever they are, you meet them where they are, right? So if I'm going to be helping people who are physically out of shape, and as a result of that, mentally out of shape. So, I have had clients, and still do have clients, who struggle with their mental health. It happens. It's just the way that they are in life and how they respond to their environments and the information around them. Everyone's different. So some people are more susceptible to it. Some people have different career histories that would make it more likely to have mental health conditions, like firefighters, paramedics, doctors, surgeons, soldiers. They all have to experience an element of fucking, quite horrific shit a lot of the time. That carries its baggage. Now, getting to my point, where someone is with their mental health, it can always be better, obviously, right? And when it's good, it's good. And sometimes when it's bad, it's really bad. my mission, my job was to go in and frame it in a way that, yes, you're not feeling optimal, but let's do something about this to make it better, right? So we then start to look at things like, are you sleeping well? Do you have a good diet? Do you hydrate enough? Do you have a good routine? Are you looking after yourself physically? What's your environment like? Who do you work with? What's your fucking relationships like with yourself and others? So there's all these things, but you're coming from a place of saying, right, yes, we know it's not good, but let's do something about it, and let's get you into an environment where that's championed to, like, we'll just like fucking do the work to move forward, so we can become better, right? Then on the other side of things, you've got the pity parties, is what I call them, right? Where people go, yeah, I'm going to organise a group for mental health, and then you get a load of people who just turn up and fucking talk about how bad their lives are, but without any sort of rhyme or reason to let's do about it. And then it becomes this, let's just all get together and talk about how fucking much we're struggling. Where's the end game? Like, where is the way out of that? Because then you've got the danger of that whole situation of you become the average of the 5 people you spend most time around. Fucking, I've got people who are struggling in my environment, but they're in a fucking great environment to get them out of that, because it's a non-judged, empathetic, positive environment that, yeah, we accept the fact that things might not be great in your life right now, but we're doing all we can to fucking get you out of that. And you've got a support network of people who have gone through that path, me included, to get you to a better place. There's vision and there's purpose with it. Whereas the other side of things, where you get people who organise these groups and go, yeah, let's just kind of form a fucking pity party, that's not good. And you're more likely to get people in there who are stuck in victim, stuck in the mode of the victim, going, yeah, well, my mental health, it's because of my fucking mum and my dad. My dad was an alcoholic, so therefore that's why I'm an alcoholic. Well, that's what I have a problem with. So there's very much two sides to that. And it's getting the pity party lot to go, right, fucking stop being a pity party attendee and have the fucking self-awareness to realise that in order to get somewhere that's not where you are now, you need to fucking take control. You need to want to get out of that. And this, it starts with that. It starts with self-awareness. It starts with the intent or the desire to go, I'm prepared to do the fucking work, to get to somewhere where I can no longer be a victim and be someone who is in charge of what happens moving forward. Makes sense?
And the admittance of something that's wrong as well, that's kind of a big part
Accept
of that.
it, yeah, accept it.
You
That's
accept
your
it.
life. It's happened. It's in the past. Draw a line in the fucking sand. And yeah, this isn't just as simple as that. There are people who have got extremely complex mental health conditions that would need more than something like my program, or me. Some people need to be seeking professional help from a medical perspective, psychiatry, psychotherapy. They might need to be medicated, but you're talking about very complex conditions there that needs a deep level of help, and there are multiple avenues for that. But you're talking a smaller percentage there, obviously.
Yeah. No, well, no, yeah, I know. I get where you're coming from with that. Well, we'll touch back on again when we talk about kind of what you're doing in more detail later on. But obviously, I think for a lot of the viewers and myself as well, we really want to talk to you about, obviously, a big part of your career was obviously the military, and how you kind of, I suppose everyone's fascinated with the SAS and selection. It's got this sort of stigma around it and this kind of mystique. So yeah, you kind of decided. How old were you when you decided you were going to have a crack at SF?
In actual fact, from the first week I joined the army, I always had it as a goal, because it's like when you're younger, you kind of, although I had the experience of not having the confidence and stuff in certain things, that was sort of layered with this desire. It was almost layered with another level of confidence. So I would say that for me, the difference being mentally, as in when it comes to my beliefs about my own potential from an academic perspective, for example, right, I would probably channel that into more the academic side. I had very low confidence levels in how I could perform academically. That was proven wrong later on in life. I consider myself an intelligent person and I can do all the academic stuff now. It was a belief system problem when I was a kid. And there are quirks and there are difficulties still, but I've got more belief in myself these days. But there was always a strong level of confidence in my physical ability, and there was always a hugely strong level of confidence in my resilience from a very young age, from a small child. I just have these experiences from, we didn't have a car. We lived in a fucking caravan, which was 2 miles off the beaten track. The two villages apart. I remember this one time when I was like fucking 4 or 5 years old. I walked like fucking 7 miles in the snow, in December. And I always remember my dad used to
snow
say,
up there in Fort William as well, doesn't it?
I mean, it was my little red welly boots and my snorkel jacket, little green snorkel jacket. I always remember that, and I remember this night. Really, it was at night time as well. It was pitch black. And when I was older, like when I was in my 20s and stuff, I always remember that's one of the things that my dad always remembered about me. He says, I never forget. He says, and when I passed selection, he always used to tell me this. He said, I never forget that time when we had to walk because the taxis couldn't get there. The snow was too fucking deep. So we'd gone to the shop, dropped off at the shop in the bus at a village, and to get from Speerenbridge, where the Commander Memorial is in near Fort William. We went from Speerenbridge to a place called Bohini, which was like Speerenbridge to Roybridge was 5 miles, and then Roybridge to Bohini, which was right off the beaten track, Blair Witch Project fucking territory, and that was another 2 miles. And I was like, fucking 5 years old at the time. But my dad used to say, I'll never forget that time that you walked all that way in the snow with a pair of welly boots and a snorkel jacket, and it was fucking horrendous weather. And he said, and the amount of times I said to you, do you want me to carry you? And he said, no, I want to walk. And I was marching ahead. And he says, you never complained once. That for me was like, as fucking mad as it sounds, that gave me a deep sense of like, fucking I can do anything physically, challenge. I guess it's experiences like that just sort of form who you are. But for me, I always had that level of confidence in myself, in my ability to physically get through stuff. And I always knew that I was like a fucking tenacious Jack Russell. I would never give up. That's one thing I've always been really, really confident about.
Yeah. So what age did you finally go on selection? Was you like mid-20s?
Yeah. So 22.
22, which is young, isn't it?
So the first week I joined the army, we were asked in this classroom, we were being shown all the different badges of the army, and the last one to come up was the SAS. And the platoon commander, a guy called Ewan Ross, who's a friend of mine, he said, anyone in this room ever have any aspirations to? No, they said first, did anyone know what this is? And I was like, put my hand up. Yeah, it's T2 SAS. Anyone in this room ever have any aspirations to join this regiment? And me and my best pal at the time both put our hands up, and no one else did. And then 5 years later, I joined the regiment.
Good effort. I mean, because that's young, isn't it? They're usually kind of sort of, when I was like sort of in the military, they wanted people with not a bit more experience. That's perhaps the wrong kind of word, but like having done juniors, kind of maybe mid to late 20s. They kind of, but times change and things kind of move forward and stuff like that.
I did juniors I was a very young section commander and stuff. I was only like early 20s. I did juniors at like 21. So I was a real thruster back then. I was going through the levels pretty quickly, so it was just inevitable for me. That was all I wanted to do. I don't think I'd have stayed in the army though. If I hadn't passed selection, I think I'd have got out. I just don't think the infantry and the bullshit surrounding that was for me. There's too much bullshit. I just wanted to be in the SAS. That's all. When I was a young guy, I was one of those dickheads that like had all the gear. Like I bought my own boots. Anytime I get away with it, I'd wear a fucking SAS smock and exercise.
God, yeah, I was the same. I was saying own boots as soon as I could. I was allowed own boots. Changed my jungle hat so it looked good. I had my own webbing and chest rig and all that stuff. Yeah.
There's a place called JJ's used to be in Brecon. Do you remember the place? It was like an army surplus store down in Brecon.
I think so. Yeah.
Old boy JJ with a big fucking sort of fisherman jumper, and he was a proper spotter with all the kit. But yeah, I remember doing junior Brecon, go down there and buying fucking faded jungle combats and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, I just wanted to be like, as they say in the Paris, alley as fuck. But yeah, I never used that.
Yeah, definitely, mate. Definitely, yeah. No, it's fair, but it's good that you kind of take that pride in. Like we all modified our webbing, so it was practical. You kind of had pouches where you wanted them, and it had this and this, and you just made it practical. And I think that's a good sign of like sort of your soldiering skills. It's part of it, isn't it?
Well, you know what? This is the thing. You see, I used to always say this about para-reg versus other regiments, right? And this is not to discredit any other regiments or my own, for example, right? But there was an element of, like, we used to kind of admire the ethos that the Para-Reg lads had, because, you know, like, you go to junior brecon, for example, you go to the fucking Falklands Hall where you do the lectures down there, and when you go in and everyone's fucking spread out, and there's only me and one other guy who did juniors at the time from the RHF. They didn't send a lot of people on, but there was always a lot of Para-Reg guys, and obviously 3 battalions worth, there's going to be more than anyone else. But you'd always see the fucking maroon berets sat along one row, and they'd all stick together. They'd all be sat together. And I used to admire that fact that they had real fucking principles, and you might call it conditioning or brainwashing, whatever it is, but it fucking works because they all think the same, right? They all think the same. They all get the same fucking tattoo when they join. They all fucking drink each other's piss and whatnot.
It's always like a cult. I used to liken it to a cult, you know, with the fucking Para-Reg tattoo. You couldn't wait to get that, and it is a good thing. It's almost like it's that
conditioning.
bond. Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah, that's what that, and it's huge ego territory, but that's what that needs, right? The parachute regiment needs that. That's the way it fucking works. It's like, it's a very fucking, you know, particular body of men that are trained a very particular way to be like fucking clones of each other to do a job, right? And the whole thing around kit and like getting your weapon how you want it, when, you know, it was always encouraged, I would say, in Para-Reg to be like alley as fuck sort of thing, right? That was kind of like that was the culture. Whereas in my old battalion, like my regiment, it was kind of frowned upon. It was like, if you tried to be that guy that was like a little bit, maybe, a bit an extra pouch in my fucking weapon and have my weapon a bit lower, or, you know, buy a fucking SAS smock to wear it on exercise, or buy my own pair of fucking lower boots. It was almost like, who the fuck does he think he is, kind of thing, unless you were then at a certain rank. If you'd been a junior break and you were a full screw, you'd literally earned your stripes, so therefore you could then start to do things that you get away with that because you were senior enough. If you were a young Fusilier trying that, people used to go, the fuck do you think? Who do you think you are? Get back in your box, you fucking little prick. That was the mentality. So then when I went for selection, I tell you what, fucking, I get them. I'm not fucking name calling here, but there are people that I served with in the battalion who were cunts to me when I was a young soldier. And I still remember that. And if they're watching this podcast, they'll know. They'll fucking know that at least one time they might have been bullyish, or said something, or scoffed at something, or doubted me in some way to say, he won't fucking pass selection. Begging for me to fail, right? And I'm like, I'm happy, because that shit drove me back then.
I bet they see it in a positive light now. I bet they turn around and go, I know him.
And not only that, it's like, I have no bad feeling about those people that were dickheads to me, because they would come back years later and go, how you doing, big man? You know, hope you're doing well. Fucking great that you passed selection stuff. And yeah, someone could see that in a negative, say, oh, you're fucking, and hold that resentment that you were a cunt to me back then. But I don't believe in holding that. I respect them for coming back and going, being nice to me. I appreciate that. I forget all the past. Yeah, you might have been a cunt to me when I was a young soldier, but we were both a lot younger back then. You were immature. I was the young boy trying to make my mark. It might have pissed some people off. People might have resented that, felt a bit jealous when I got in or whatever. But I thank them for that, because it fueled me. It was meant to be that way. People who doubted me, people who said I couldn't do it, actually helped me. I've got those people to thank for that. And, you know, I don't hold any sort of negative, but it happens. Yeah, people are there waiting in the sidelines going, "Oh, fucking fail." Yeah. And it's jealousy. They really mean it, it's just a reflection of themselves.
Yeah, it's jealousy, and you see it in all things. There's always people out there that want you to fail, and that are negative about that and everything else. And I usually see it as their own,
as a reflection, and that's why I say, you know, me saying I have no bad feeling over these. I actually thank them for it, and I wish them well, because that's a reflection of me, genuinely.
Yeah.
And that message alone, like, if somebody hears that, it's like, if you've been a fucking cruel bastard to somebody, if you've been nasty, if you've been a twat, that is a direct reflection of yourself and your insecurities and your self-doubts and all these things.
Insecurities,
anyone that's really happy with themselves, if there's someone that's really happy with their own life and with themselves, they've never got a reason to be like that. Never.
Right, you froze. Sorry, you froze for a minute. Then it's okay. You're back. Yeah, no, absolutely. And like you say, you'll always get that in all walk of life. People are jealous. People will criticize you, everything else. And it's good that you kind of have that frame of mind to not hold grudges. I'm the same. I don't like holding grudges, and count on one hand the amount of people I've fell out with over the years. And I don't think there's any of them that I've not made amends with. And I kind of like, because life's too short at the end of the day. I know it sounds corny, but it is. It's too short to hold grudges. And it's only negative impact on yourself as well, isn't it?
Yeah. And those people have got the shit. Someone who's a bully, bullying's horrible. You always have to think about this, like when you see someone who's a bully, they've had some level of discomfort to deal with themselves, because bullies aren't just born, I think they're created.
Yeah, learned behaviour.
It's learned behaviour. The thing is, when you hold a grudge, here's the thing about it, and I spoke about this just last night actually, is that when you think about the term hold a grudge, if you hold a grudge for somebody, you've literally got to hold that. So you're holding it. If you think about it as like you're having to hold on to it, like baggage. It's like, why would you do that? What's the point? Let it go.
Yeah, sometimes it's harder to kind of be off with someone than it is to get on with them. If you create an atmosphere when you walk into the room and there's an atmosphere, it's horrible. It's easy just to be, look, we've had our dramas. I've got no dramas now. And it might be you've had a fist fight, and after that it's like, yeah, sound, make amends. That used to happen a lot, didn't it?
I've done this right recently. Someone who I had a bit of beef with years ago, and we know we had the last time we communicated there was a bit of beef, not a serious beef, just a little bit of niff-naff bit from years ago. And I see that person, and I walk up and I go, "Hi mate, how you doing?" Shake the hand. "You all right? You well? Looking well?" Walk away. Where does someone go with it? There's no fight there left. To fight, you have to have resistance, right? If you take away the resistance, their potential, there's nothing to resist off. Therefore, they have to let it go.
Yeah.
And again, it's a reflection, and that's not being someone's doormat or letting someone wrong. Like, there are certain people in life, there are a particular couple of people I would say in my life that are the exception to that wronged me in a way that I would never want to speak to them again. I would never forget. But I let it go to let it go for myself, because again, it's a reflection of me, and I have to hold that grudge. So rather than hold a grudge and feel bad, that's just creating resistance within me and unsettlement. So there is no point in holding. Yeah, I don't fucking ever want to be in a place where I would want to speak to these people again or forgive them in a way that like we go, yeah, we can be mates. But I just let them go and go, right, they're never going to be involved in my life again. It's just they're part of the past. And what were the lessons within that I can thank them for, that I had to learn, that made me a better person?
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, that's a positive way of looking at it. I like that. I like that way of looking at it.
Karma's a fucking bitch also,
Yeah, true. So yes, let's talk about selection. Obviously, it's kind of years and years ago. Selection was a bit more kind of, there was mystique, and obviously there's a lot of guys now been out talking about. I think it's a good thing personally, because it kind of, people are genuinely interested in it. I don't mean talking about ops in detail, because there's obviously that ops sect, there's the kind of, you put people's names out there, but as far as some of your experiences, how did you find selection?
Hard. Yeah. Really hard. No getting away from it. I found it physically really demanding. I mean, I was always a small fry, so I was like 9 stone wet when I did selection, and the enormity of the challenge, it was both overwhelming and really motivating at the same time, because I was faced with this fact, right? So I had a lot to gain on selection, and I'm really glad that the situation was the way it was, because I think that really upped the stakes for me. So if you're in para-reg, you go for selection, your mate's been for selection, his mate's been for selection. It's a normal part of the process. When someone goes to para-reg, there's a high percentage of guys who will ultimately just, selection's part of their process, like another course. And it's not really so much. So the contrast of para-reg battalion and the regiment, for example, loads of guys in there. There's loads of guys within the regiment that are ex-parachute regiment, right? So it's a really common thing, whereas from where I came from, it wasn't at all. There was one other guy he was my CO when I joined the battalion in the 90s. He was the CO, and he had been in the regiment back in like the 70s. He was an officer, obviously, right? So, and his dad had been in. His dad was a squadron commander. He was then troop commander, squadron commander, and he had this really strong reputation, notoriety of being the guy who was an ex-regiment guy. So he was hugely admired. And since that, no one had been able to get in. So since the 70s until when I did it, no one had passed selection. I don't think anyone had ever passed selection apart from him and his dad, who were two officers. Anyone that went as another rank, like as a full screw or a lance jack or whatever, if you get in, you're the mold breaker. You're the guy.
Yeah.
You're the Roger Bannister of the fucking SAS world. For me, I was thinking a couple of things that I always told myself. I used to say to myself, someone has to fucking do it, right? It has to be somebody. So the first guy has to be somebody. Why can't it be me? What's to say that I can't be that guy? You know, what have I got to lose? What have I got to gain? The fact that I had nothing to lose, but everything to gain. I was always going to be respected if I'd gone back and failed, and people say, "Oh, you know, there's another guy." I would have been another guy who was in that small group of elite people in the minds of the battalion that was, oh, he went for selection. So you kind of get that notoriety of, oh, he's been to selection, he's been down to fucking, you know, ahead of from that, you did selection. So you're always going to have that bit of, you know, sort of credibility if you've been there and tried it. But I thought, fuck, that's not good enough, you know, I need to be the guy who goes and actually does it. So I guess that was a huge motivating factor, as well as the fact that I didn't really want to go back to the battalion and do battalion life. That filled me with fucking dread. So I knew that my path wasn't really within the art. And then, so obviously I thought, if I don't pass this, I'm kind of, I threw, you know, I kind of threw all my fucking chips on fucking green, really. And I thought, I've just got to go for broke here. So when I was on selection, you know, the hills phase, I found really fucking hard. You know, I was physically really fit, but towards the end of that, I started to really feel it, and I fucking scraped over the line. Like, I think, like, endurance, you had 20 hours to do. I think I did it in 19. I was like an hour inside the distance, inside the time limit. You know, but that was like the last leg was the fucking nightmare, because you start in the dark, you finish in the dark, you're fucking sleep deprived. You've been on the hills for a month at that point. You're fucked. You know,
Yeah.
you really are. So I found it difficult. I did, but I liked the jungle. You know, the jungle was hard, but I really enjoyed the jungle. I just saw the jungle as, I always went into the jungle as, on the process of doing the jungle, I was always in that frame of mind that this isn't selection, this is just a course that I'm trying to do well on, and I have to get to the end. There is no option to fail. There's no option to VW. VW, for me, honestly, hand on heart, I never ever considered VW once in selection. I never even thought about it. I was scared of failing and not getting through, not being accepted, but I never considered throwing the towel in at any point. And
VW being voluntary withdrawal, isn't it? Just for the viewers and the followers, yeah.
Honestly, that is the overriding factor why people don't get in, is that most people VW. It's not a lot of people really know that fact, that it's not the failure rate, it's the VW rate that's so high. That's why the percentage is so small. There would be guys that if they just didn't VW and they weren't being pussies, that they would get in because they're good enough. It's something within them that makes them crack. And this is the thing when it comes to like selection, like physically, yes, it's really demanding, but your strongest fucking muscles between your ears.
It's that self-belief, isn't it? Like we talked about, you've got to have that self-belief. You start to question that self-belief, like maybe a bit of imposter syndrome, because that's a really common thing. Like, should I be here? And then you're letting these kind of intrusive kind of things go in there, and then the cracks start to appear, and before you know it, you're questioning. And then you're VW, and it's job done, isn't it?
Yeah, people get in their own heads, think I can't do this. It's not for me. I think instead of I would say, rather than self-belief, I would say it's more someone's mental resilience that it comes down to, which that's kind of linked to self-belief. But at the same time, you know, I was riddled with self-doubt. for a lot of my life. But that's more from a thought process of, am I good enough to be, good at this job, or to do a certain appointment? Like, even when I was in the regiment, I used to think to myself, how far can I go realistically? But this is before I decided to get out, obviously. But when I was early in my career at the regiment, and really enjoying the process, and then you're sat in there, you're sat maybe listening to a set of orders, or you watch someone perform in a certain position, like fucking staff sergeant or sergeant major, you go, right, realistically, like when I've been in that long and I'm at that level where it's been decided whether I'm good enough to be promoted or not, if I do then get promoted and I get this responsibility of this job, am I going to be able to do it? And not only that, am I going to be good at it, or am I going to be found out? Am I going to reach my ceiling point and then be exposed for having a ceiling and really not being that good at a certain thing? That's part of the fear factor with it as well. And again, I think people I speak to throughout their regimental careers and stuff, people have been put in positions where they have had that thought process and plagued by it, because it's one thing passing selection, going over the fucking hills with a burger in your back and getting through the jungle and doing basic soldiering skills at a high level, understanding your place in the pack. And then when you start to go up the rank structure, like I was a full school when I left, so I wasn't at any dizzy heights, but when you then start to do things like you get your own troop and you've got decisions to make that are fucking, sometimes people's lives are on the line. There's a lot of responsibility with that, and some people can embrace that and take it and do really well with it, and others can't. I've seen it firsthand where someone's in a position you just go, fuck me, like they're not the guy for this job, and then others are just like a duck to water, and that, I think that's more of a natural ability in a lot of ways. Yeah, some of it's learned, but a lot of it's natural ability, whether someone can really be that, have that presence and lead effectively.
Yeah, I suppose this echoes in other careers as well. It's when you're at a position when you look at someone that's running your team or that's in that position, you look at them and think, I can do a better job than that. Do you know where you think, you look at them and you'd have seen people throughout your various careers that are in positions and you think, you really shouldn't be there. I can do that better. And sometimes that's the point when you go, right, I need to now step up to the plate and kind of push for promotion or do this because I can do that better. And that's a good thing, isn't it? That's almost a bit of a driving force as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and I guess there's a lot of negative connotations attached to that. If you're thinking about yourself, am I good enough, for example, to do a job? If I get this position, am I going to be someone who people will look up to? Are people going to like me? Are people going to respect me? And a lot of it's self-acceptance and self-image, how you see yourself. And honestly, I've spoken to so many people that they're in a position within the military or whatever, and they constantly get riddled with the self-doubt of not being good enough. Even though they are good enough, they have something that most people have, which is imposter syndrome. It's even a thing. It's like, it's just really normal to have self-doubt of, what am I doing here? Who put me here? Who put me in this position when I'm fucking in charge of these other men who I respect and are all individually capable of themselves? I mean, I'm essentially not to use the word in charge, obviously, but I run a coaching program for some fucking highly experienced men. And I'm over that. I'm over that now. The imposter syndrome that I had, I was getting a couple of years ago, up until a couple of years ago, and I've completely made peace with that now, right? But when I first started doing running the Modern Warrior project, I would be like, application from somebody who is like fucking, like one of my clients, for example, he was like one of the top firefighters in the whole of Scotland, right? A lot of experience, a lot of leadership qualities, really experienced individual. The automatic feeling with that formerly, like not now, but the automatic feeling I would have had with that maybe a few years ago would be, why does this person want me to help them? Like, what can I do for this person? They've got more experience than me. They're older than me. They've got more leadership experience than I've got. Then the imposter syndrome kicks in as to why me? Why am I here? But then eventually I got to the point where I would take people through the process and realize that everyone's just a human being. Everyone's been put in a position. Everyone's had a career. cut us all open, we'll still bleed the same fucking stuff, right? And we're all just trying to be better. So I thought, well, why me? Because I'm the one that's been approached. Something that I'm doing, something I'm saying resonates and sounds like something that they want to know more about. So then it's about cultivating that inner self-confidence over time, and it's like a fermentation process. It comes with experience. It comes with repetition, getting good at what you do and doing it enough times so that it's like you know your own fucking face, and that's then when I can come on podcasts and speak from a place of true experience with confidence, genuine confidence that comes with zero self-doubt. Right? So but it takes time. When someone's 30 years old even, and they're trying to be the person who is confident as fuck and looking like they really know what they're talking about, or looking like they're faultless, it's like you're going to have self-confidence issues. It's normal. Like, just give yourself time and keep fucking at it. Like, the main thing is just keep doing the reps. That is the most important thing. It's not being perfect. It's about keep fucking showing up, keep doing the reps, keep doing what you're doing. And through time, one of the things that people lack these days especially is fucking patience. Like, good food takes time to cook. Fucking experience takes time to cultivate. That's why it's experience and not just a fucking one and done weekend course that you have to sit, right? Knowledge is one thing, but experience is something else. Knowledge without experience is fucking bullshit,
Yeah, no, 100%. And it's like you say, it's and that experience comes from almost like a proven track record. Now you must be at a point now where you've had really, really positive results, positive feedback. So that also adds to it as well, doesn't it? Of course it does. You look at it and go, well, I'm getting the results. It's working.
Like, if you think of a box, right? And if you think of, so if you think of a box, and I go on my screen, I go like, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So number one, you have that they usually don't tap into, because most of the time people just don't take action and stuff that they know they can do, they know they've done before, but for some reason they procrastinate, they put things off, and they delay the process, and then just don't action the plan, right? So the potential is not tapped into. But let's take it for this: you've got potential here, and then if you take action in the second box across from that, right? So this is the action. So if you release potential and you take action, depending on the level of action you take, will then dictate what happens in corner 3, which is results. So you get potential, action, results. The level of result will be in line with the level of action that you take. You take massive action, you get a great result. Toe in the water, you get something a little bit, but it might be enough to get you to the next phase. But you're not going to get as dramatic as a result as if you really leaned into the process. So you did your last sort of like transformation program with your fiance, right? And you got a great result. Why? Because you took fucking action. You leaned into the process. You ate the meals. You prepped the meals. You ate the meals. You did the reps in the gym. You showed up, right? So you took massive action. And you got a great result, right? So you always had the potential. The action was taken. The result's great. Now, the last box, which is 4, is your self-belief. So self-belief comes off past experience and proven track record of what you've done before. So your past experience influences your beliefs. Then your beliefs here will then allow you to tap into more potential, because you've got the belief that you can do it. So there's more likelihood that you will then tap into more potential, and then that cycle just repeats itself. It's a self-perpetuating cycle.
Yeah, and you're right there, because I did the plan the first time. I got good results, and I used to, even sort of a few weeks into the plan, I questioned whether it was going to work. I was really skeptical, because I've trained my whole life, but I've never really I'm not unhealthy, but never done a proper plan. And I was always skeptical about the diet and that working. When I trusted the system and it worked, I got a really good result and I was happy with it. So I left it a bit and then did it again and got better results. So that just emphasizes exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, because it's like knowledge breeds confidence, repetition's the mother of skill. It's just keep showing up and doing the work. That's what I would always say to everybody. Just keep showing up, and if you fuck it up, just go again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Learn from it and go again.
I'm conscious of time, but I want to touch on a few bits and bobs. I want to talk about if you've got any kind of memorable stories from your time spent with the Special Forces, any ops or memorable times you can talk about. Obviously, we all know the kind of ops second without going into too much detail. And also I want to talk about you because you said you got quite heavily into bodybuilding as well. So starting off for the SAS, bits and bobs, is there any kind of memorable moments you can tell about for the viewers and the followers at home?
You know, I can't obviously go into things to do with ops and stuff because obviously that's part of my sort of self, my own level of integrity with that is that I don't talk about like things that I shouldn't talk about because it's like, you know, I like to maintain that relationship with the regiment and, you know, people within that who I hugely respect. So yeah, I wouldn't be one of those guys who starts talking about, you know, what happened on ops and stuff like that. But I will actually do it, not in the regiment, but after I left the regiment actually, because it's kind of like, it's still a good story, but it's when I was working for CNN and I was working with this big guy called Bill, I forget his name, but he was an ex-US Marine. And we had to go up to Kirkuk to pick up this satellite truck from Baghdad. And it was like a couple of hours drive, like I think it was 2.5 hours drive or something like that. And we got the briefing the night before and it was like, right, you got to fucking through this village. I forget what the village was called, but the local guy who was briefing us, he says, right, this village, he says, is like a hotspot. It's one of the worst areas at the moment, like for fucking drama. No one stops there. You got to keep going, right? So we had that as a bit of a fucking focal point to like when we approach this point, we'll be on our fucking toes, you know. So there was a convoy. There was two vehicles. We were driving the. We were in one. So me and Bill were in this armored Mercedes at the back, and then there was my mate Jeff and a local guy who was driving. So he had a local, like an Iraqi driver with him and his car. So only four of us, one local, three of us. And they were ahead, we were behind, and we got to this village where it was like, right, guys, be on your fucking, you know, have your wits about you. And there was a bit of traffic as well, so it was slow moving. There was loads of fucking people there. And it just goes to this is the point of the story really is to not everything's as it would seem, right? Don't believe all you hear. So we're going through this little village, and all of a sudden there's just all this fucking stuff on the road. There's a bit of barbed wire and some rocks and shit like that, and we're trying to meander our way through this. There's been loads of fucking shit blowing up and whatnot. There was loads of damage, and as we were going through this territory, everyone's fucking eyeballing us. Then all of a sudden, it was like fuck, like something happened to the car. And I looked out the fucking, I looked in the rear view mirror, and there was a fucking wheel on its side, like flat.
Bonus.
And Bill was like, "Shit, we've lost the fucking wheel, dude." He says that the fucking wheels come off. So I was like, "Fuck!" Straight away, you can't help it, but you start to like think, right, fucking, calm down, don't panic. But you're fucking panicking, right? You're nervous because you think, "Fucking hell, we could get fucking killed this, we could die here, right?" Turns out, fucking next thing you know, the fucking wagon's moving, and the driver from the first car gets out. The Iraqi guy gets out, runs down. We think he's going to get lynched. Then all of a sudden, the fucking rent-a-crowd around this car was like, "We're fucked, right? We're fucked." Turns out they're like the fucking friendliest bunch of Iraqis that you could have fucking shaken a stick at. So we're getting this, we're all picking the car up, and they lifted us off this fucking pile of rubbish, and then all of a sudden the car started rolling. I looked back and it was just a fucking random wheel on the floor. It wasn't our wheel. In the moment, it was like the fucking wheels are falling off the car, but the fucking wheel was from something else from before. And I was like, fucking hell. It was one of those moments where your fucking arse is twitching like a madman. And it was almost the crowd, they were like clapping their hands as we were driving away. I was like, fucking Jesus, like when you think that something's going to go completely hairy and it actually ends up like fucking Disneyland, you know? So, yeah. But as far as in the regiment, you know, many stories, but none that I could really think of that I could really talk about without thinking, am I saying too much?
No,
So,
that's
yeah.
fair enough. I didn't expect it to kind of, you know, and some guys talk about bits and bobs. Obviously, they leave out names and that, and it's down to their discussion at the end of the day. But yes, you kind of you spent several years with the SES, and then you kind of decided, right, I'm gonna move on. Which I suppose, talk me through that, because is that an unusual step to make, or do people tend to stay? What's the kind of average when people trying to stay? And does it vary from person to person?
It does. I mean, I think you've got to, I was always one of those people who try not to overthink the process. I'm always one of those people who kind of gets that gut feeling when I know something is going to change. I know that it's time. So I tend to trust my gut quite a lot. And it's just like a knowing. It's like a knowing that you get. It could be something the way you feel in a relationship. It could be within a job. It could be getting rid of a fucking car that you know that's served its time. But for me, it was unexpected because when I joined the regiment, you know, both from my own mind and some of the stuff that people would say that kind of influences your thought process as well. So when I joined, for example, because I was really young, I joined the squadron. Some of the older boys, like they suggest to you that you're going to be RSM one day, and purely based on your age, not your ability, because you've only just joined, and it's like, well, you'll be fucking future RSM, blah blah blah. And then you go in a couple of years, and it's like, yeah, you're probably in line for fucking this and this and this. So like my career path, you know, I was going to be like training squadron, you know, in my mind I'd had it all fucking mapped out, and I guess it would have been the natural progression, which would have been training squadron, DS and selection. That'd be a main post, and then go back and get a troop, right, and take over as troop staffy. That was in my vision. That was what I wanted to do, and that was kind of being mapped out in a way as well. But then suddenly I had this moment of change of heart. I just remember thinking, I just don't think I want to do this anymore. And I think it came from a place of feeling like I didn't have any control over my future and my life, because the army is very institutionalized. It's very much a controlled environment, right? You're being controlled and dictated to what you do in your life to a point. And I think that started to feel a bit off for me. I just thought, you know, I just feel like over my time in the regiment, I had done a lot of things. I'd been a lot of places. Like I'd been away a lot, and you know, fucking did a lot of the shit that I thought as being the juicy stuff that I'd always envisaged doing within the regiment. And once you'd done that rotation a few times, that 2 year cycle of you doing, you know, job to job, task to task, responsibility to responsibility, it then becomes like cyclical, obviously, and it changes every cycle because you then move up and change, you know, change responsibility or whatever it is. But for me, it just got to the point I thought, right, what's my life looking forward? I've got decisions to make. And I just felt this pull. I felt this pull that something else was calling me. I got really into bodybuilding as well. So I was so into my bodybuilding that I started to almost like fucking get frustrated because I couldn't do my bodybuilding and that job at the same time, because I'd be up and down like a yo-yo, and I became obsessive about bodybuilding. I really did. I wanted to be a fucking, you know, a really successful like competitive bodybuilder. It's really different to what I feel like now, because I wouldn't want that now, but at the time, you know, that was a real passion, and being in the gym was a real passion. So I guess I had this vision of maybe I could get out and maybe that's what I could do. Maybe I could become a trainer. I could open my own gym. It could be I could live my passion. And the more I thought about that, the more I kind of felt less passionate about staying in the army. So I just decided, in my fucking gut, I thought, I'm done now. Really, I don't want this to be happening. And also, my daughter was not born yet, but you know, with my daughter and the prospect of having kids, that I would have kids, I would look around and see, you know, guys who had families, who had kids, and they were never seeing their kids. You know, they were away all the time. And for me, I always remembered something I heard a long time ago, which was the most important thing you can do for kids is to be there. And for me personally, I just thought, if I'm going to have kids, I want to fucking be there for them. I want to be a dad who's present all the time, because, you know, I can't see it being any other way. And so for me, I just thought, yeah, I've got to make a move here. I've got to make a decision, and I decided it, and I made a decision and made it a right one. And I remember when I signed off, it was like, you're fucking what? Like, Sergeant Major, the OC were like, fucking hell, this is a shock, because there was no hint of it. There was no warning signs. There was no sort of like, oh, he's getting a bit fucking disinterested. You know, I was thriving. But I went to see the OC, and he just said, respectfully, he says, look, I could sit here and try and persuade you to stay. He says, but I believe that I think that you have made this decision from a good place. He says, and I think you're really sure about what you want to do. Do you know what you want to do when you leave? I said, yeah, I want to open a gym. I was really sure on that. But I then understood that in order to do that, I had to have some capital behind me. So the regiment wasn't going to pay me enough to save that capital. So I thought, I'm going to have to get out, go and do some fucking consultancy work, security work abroad, get paid good money, and save up and put the money that I'd saved into opening a gym. And that's what I did.
Well, fair play to you. Do you ever have any look back and have any regrets of that?
Nah, I don't regret any of it.
Because it's a bold move, because everyone will say, obviously, it's such a dedication, because obviously people don't realise that obviously once you've done, and obviously I never went on selection, but I know quite a lot about it through research. You do selection, then you've probably got 2 years after that of continual training for all the various roles, don't you? So it's some dedication, a large part of your life, and a lot of effort to get in, to then decide to leave, isn't it? But like you said,
that's like saying when you meet somebody, you spend a long time with them, you get married, you spend 20 grand in a wedding, but then you're not happy after a year, so you stay together because you spent a lot of money. Similar sort of thing. You got to do what feels right at any stage of your life. You got to go with your gut and trust the fact that you got to make decisions from the gut, from the heart, rather than overthinking it and getting in your head and going, well, I've only got 6 years to push. I've been in the army for fucking 16 years. I've only got 6 years to push till I get my pension. That's not a reason to do that either. I don't think. What can you do in that 6 years in a new career that you wouldn't have done otherwise? So how's things going to change? You're going to be 6 years older, 6 years more institutionalized. I thought, if I'm going to get out, it's going to be fucking now, or I'm going to stay in for the long term because I'm young enough to get out and do something else, start a new career, and it feels right.
No, fair play. I mean, it's like I say, it's a bold way of looking at it, and obviously it takes a bit of that stepping into the unknown, and I suppose it comes back to that whole challenging yourself and testing yourself again, because there's nothing more testing than dropping sticks and starting something completely new, isn't there?
Again, you got to see life as chapters. It's like you can't I don't define myself by being in the SAS, for example, right? And I know people who do. I know people who have defined themselves by what they've done in the past, and I don't think that's a healthy thing. It's like it's part of your life. School is part of your life. Relationships are part of your life. Being in the fucking infantry was part of mine. Being in the Royal Highland Fusiliers was a fucking great part of my life. It was a season. The regiment was another one. It was just part of my life. It was like several years of my life that is 47 years long. So it's a portion of it. I was a competitive bodybuilder. I made my mark as a competitive bodybuilder at national level. I was one of the fucking, one of the top guys out there for a few years. At an amateur level. I'm a coach. I'm a gym owner. I was a gym owner. I've had fucking multiple things happen in my life, but I don't define myself by any of them. I think I more define myself by someone who is always trying to be better and contribute what I can to help others. That's how I'd like to be remembered. Being a good dad. I like to define myself partly by being a good dad. There are multiple things that you could look at that, but I think when you channel yourself into one thing and go, right, I'm the guy. I'm Lindsay Bruce, ex-SAS. Like, no, fucking not. It's just something I did. It's not my title. It doesn't come. Yeah, it might be in my fucking Instagram bio because people are interested in what I did, but it doesn't define me.
I'll bear that in mind when I put this on the podcast title. Then I'll put that bit further down. I'll put mindset coach first.
Yeah, you have whatever you want. I mean, you can do that however. It doesn't bother me at all. But what I'm saying is, it's like, if you define yourself by any one moment or experience in your life, then that can become a habit. And the thing is, it's like Roberto Baggio. People define Roberto Baggio as being the guy who missed a penalty in the fucking 19, but really his true legacy has been one of the fucking greatest footballers that ever lived, and someone who carried that team through to the final with a fucked knee. That should be his legacy, not the guy who fucking skied a penalty. And he might have that as his own legacy, right? But people tend to sometimes fail at something and define themselves by the failure and then carry that like a fucking bag of shit moving forward in life. It's like, ditch what you got to ditch, take what you can that's going to help you, and travel light and fucking ditch the shit you don't need anymore. If stuff doesn't serve you anymore, get rid.
Yeah, fair play, fair one, pal. Look, it's been a pleasure. I'm conscious of the time. I know we kind of had about an hour and a half, and I think we've covered everything that kind of we really wanted to cover. And what I say is, I kind of I enjoy doing these podcasts because I feel like I get to meet interesting people like yourself. I always try and take something away. Some guests I take more away than others, but I do genuinely, I do feel like a lot of your philosophies, for want of a better word, and kind of, you kind of with your mindset and bits and bobs, I've taken a lot away from that. There's a lot of kind of thinking that, and I'm going to watch this one back. I tend, obviously when I'm editing them and everything else, but I'm going to watch it back because there's a lot of stuff you said there that really kind of resonates with me. Obviously with the ADHD, there's that connection and stuff like that, but the stuff you said there about kind of not sort of, labeling yourself with the past, so to speak, and I think there's just a lot there that kind of resonates. So yeah, I have taken a lot away from it, pal. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks very much for having me on the podcast, mate. I've really enjoyed it.
Good, mate. Thank you very much. Well, I will have a quick chat with you in a minute off air. But for now, pal, I wish you well with all your future endeavours. And yeah, hopefully we stay in touch. And whatever you do down the line, if you fancy coming back on for another session, then I'd more than happily have you.
Excellent, mate. If people want to get hold of me, by the way, they can just get me through Instagram, Lindsay Bruce Official. So I'm sure you'll probably post that on your Instagram or podcast anyway. So just in case anyone's interested in maybe coaching inquiries, that type of thing.
I'll drop some links on there when I put the clips out, because I'll put out some tasters and some teasers and stuff.
Yeah,
and obviously I'll put out the full podcast in a few weeks' time. But I will add all the links to your social media now to get hold of you if they need to.
Cool, excellent, mate. Nice one, Chris.
Thank you very much. I'll have a chat with you in a minute, but thank you again.
Cheers, buddy.